Ghost of Tsushima does many things right: its combat, its setting, its exploration, and its amazing audio-visual presentation. This is one of, if not the best looking game that has ever been created. It may not have the best animation in a game, or have the best lighting or textures, but through the use of colour and art design, it rises above almost any other game that I have ever played. The combat here is wonderful too. There's a bit of Spider-Man in here, and a little bit of Neo and Sekiro. At first glance, this was hard to imagine how it would work, but Sucker Punch has crafted such a tight and fluid combat system. The influences by Neo and Sekiro may not have been intentional, but are very obvious for anyone looking, with the 4 different stances combat has, and the focus on parrying and dodging gameplay. You also can't help but think of Ubisoft while playing, due to Tsushima's use of a map marker style open world. Although the way the world is designed here is far better than anything Ubisoft has created. This is a far leaner version of something you would find in Assassin's Creed or even The Witcher 3. Sucker Punch also delivered some amazing post-launch DLC. They added additional gameplay features like armor loadouts, New Game Plus, and additional difficulties. Ghost of Tsushima Legends was also released, which features co-op, a separate campaign that is not connected to the main game, survival missions, and even raids, all of which was free. It's no secret that the PlayStation 4 has had some incredible exclusives, and it's no surprise that Ghost of Tsushima is quite high up on my list of them. I don't have a definitive ranking of all the exclusives, but I would put this somewhere between Death Stranding and Days Gone, but far below God of War, Bloodborne, and The Last of Us Part 2. This isn't for any one reason, but because of a multitude of reasons. As much as Ghost of Tsushima is a gorgeous game and incredibly fun to play, it doesn't feel quite as unique as it should due to its rearranging of familiar elements. It also features some unbelievably boring characters and dull mission design in both the side missions and story missions. The enemy AI can also make combat feel way easier than it should be, even on the most challenging difficulty. There's a lot of problems that this game suffers from, but like I said a moment ago, this is very high up on my list of PlayStation 4 exclusives, and that's because the things that it gets right are very good and are the most important aspects of a game. Okay, that's my broad opinion on Ghost of Tsushima. It's an amazing game, and you should definitely play it if you haven't yet. Before we continue on with the review, I want to quickly knock over some housekeeping. Firstly, this is my second playthrough of Ghost of Tsushima. I played this back in July when it was first released on the PlayStation 4. However, this playthrough was done on the PlayStation 5 because Sucker Punch has patched the game, allowing for 60 FPS on the newer console. And this has added so much to the gameplay. It has never looked so smooth and felt so crisp to play. Visuals are also enhanced significantly, as you can imagine, making exploration and traversal even that much better. What isn't so great though, unfortunately, is my recording came out a little wrong. The darks look really good, but the bright areas got way overexposed, so if anything looks really off to you, just know that's not what it looks like in game. Additionally, an extra difficulty was also added after launch called Lethal Mode. This not only makes enemies do more damage, but they also take more damage themselves. This really intrigued me because most games typically just up the numbers for the enemies as the difficulties get higher. Simply put, you do less damage and you also take more damage. Whereas this change makes it an even playing ground. You'll die in a single hit or two, but so will your enemies. I'm mostly positive on this difficulty mode, and I'm glad it exists, but I'll do its own mini review towards the end of the gameplay section. Lastly, I won't be talking about the Legends DLC in this review, as it has enough content for its own video. I'm currently playing through it at the moment, and I might review it at a later point. If you enjoyed the video, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment with your opinion on Ghost of Tsushima. With all that being said, let's continue with the review. If I could describe the combat here in one word, that word would be beautiful. Like Sekiro or Spider-Man before it, once you master the mechanics, every fight begins to play out like a dance. Battles will start and end quicker than it took you to survey the area. Parrying, dodging, changing stances, and using special abilities will all come so naturally to you, making the combat look so graceful. The use of effects here also lend themselves perfectly to how combat was designed to look as elegant as possible. Whether it's the red or blue shine on enemy weapons, alerting you to either dodge or parry, or the slowdown on each hit with the Dance of Wrath ability, likewise when you land a perfect parry, giving you a brief moment to deal a devastating blow. Visual effects can be seen in every aspect of gameplay, and I love this about the game. It makes the visual style even more unique, more distinct from others of a similar kind. While the visual style here is extremely unique, every facet of combat is constructed from other games. Although this is not a negative at all, because Sucker Punch has taken the best bits and pieces from 3 fantastic combat systems. Combat here is one part Insomniac's Spider-Man, with the focus on light and heavy attacks, basic combos, and fighting a multitude of enemies at once with no option to lock on. Instead, the direction that you're pointing with your left stick is the direction you'll attack. Next, it's one part Neo with the 4 different combat stances, which you can unlock through observing and killing Mongol leaders across Tsushima. These combat stances are used to counter the 4 main enemy types. Stone Stance, which is the first stance you'll unlock, is used against swordsmen. Water Stance is used against shieldmen. Wind Stance and Moon Stance, which are used against spearmen and brutes respectively. All of which have their own combos and unlockable abilities. Finally, combat is one part Sekiro through the heavy emphasis on blocking, dodging, parrying, and breaking your enemy's guard. While I thought this was going to be an interesting combo to say the least, it actually turned out really well. It's honestly surprising how tightly weaved this combat system feels. Nothing feels out of place and there's a great sense of progression here. You never go more than a few missions without unlocking something new to use, whether that's a new weapon, a new ability, or new traversal equipment. That's one half of how you can handle combat. The other half is with all the ghost abilities. This includes the short bow and long bow, which are used to take down enemies from a distance, all the different ghost equipment like the kunai, black powder bombs, poison darts, and so on. Lastly, there is the basic stealth takedown, simply sneak up behind an enemy and execute them. While I had a lot of fun using all the different ghost equipment, this half of gameplay is completely and utterly broken. All thanks to one thing: dumb enemy AI. This is some of the most stupid AI I've ever seen in an open world game. You'll walk in their peripheral vision and they won't see you. You'll kill someone a few meters away from them and they won't hear anything. They stop looking for you extremely quickly, and they will not attack or block you if you're not on the same ground level as them. And this constantly happens all the time, and this even happens on the hardest difficulty. There's no way to fix this issue. I think if Sucker Punch scaled back the amount of resources you had at any given time, like having about half the arrows or ghost equipment, most of this would be resolved, because you wouldn't just be able to walk into an enemy fortress without interacting with the actual combat. This is contrasted even more when you get to the duels. I really like these fights. They are, to me, the high point in combat, but they don't represent what the game is giving to you as a player. See, boss fights to me are meant to take everything you've learnt so far and push your skills to the limit. But in the duels, you don't have any of your ghost equipment available to you. So if you went down the ghost path in the early to mid game, you'll be fucked in these fights. One half of me says that this was done for them to be a proper boss fight, a test of your skills type fight, but the other half of me is saying Sucker Punch knew ghost equipment was overpowered, so they took them away from you. Perhaps it was the right thing to strip away half of your kit to make these fights work, but at the same time, it's not always consistent. See, there's this fight that starts out as a duel, and then phase 2 begins, and it's no longer in the dueling style. You have everything available to you, and this is how I defeated him. If this was how every duel was able to be beaten, then they would be a joke. I do think Sucker Punch did the right thing here, but I can't help but feel that the system is at odds with itself. So that's the basics of the combat system done, and how it works regardless of what difficulty you're on. Moving on to lethal mode and the changes that brings to the game. I have a love-hate relationship with lethal mode. I love the changes it brings with dying in a single hit or two, but also killing enemies that quickly. I hate how the enemy AI doesn't get any smarter, it just gets more aggressive. I love that the loading between deaths only takes a few seconds, letting you get back in the action in a flash. I hate that when you die, enemies will walk over your body for longer than it takes you to respawn. I love that it really makes you feel like you've mastered the combat system in order to succeed. I hate that the ghost path is still completely broken and you can steamroll 90% of the game this way. I love that the duels here really feel like duels now, forcing you to remember enemy attack patterns and get better at each fight instead of just healing through all their damage. I hate how many of the duels you'll die in a single hit that is unblockable, and the whole animation from appearing to hitting you will happen in less than half a second. I could continue going on about these things, but I think you get the point. The great accomplishment of lethal mode is it makes you feel like you've mastered the combat, something that I haven't felt since playing Sekiro. While the skill cap here isn't as high as something like Sekiro or even Neo, there is a very rewarding feeling playing on lethal. I think the only part of lethal mode that is very challenging is the duels, because you can't just respawn and try a different tactic. You have to learn the enemy's attack patterns and be extremely patient. While some of them you can come back later with upgraded armor, more health, and better charms to survive more than one hit, there are a few exceptions, particularly the final boss, and I think this is a really good thing. That's what the difficulty is offering to you, and it delivers. If it wasn't for some of the near instant attacks sometimes, these fights would be near flawless on this difficulty. While most of the game basically plays the same regardless of difficulty, and if my memory serves me right, none of the enemies were particularly spongy on my first playthrough. I do have a little nitpick with this difficulty though. Some of the bosses here will only have 1 or 2 recorded lines for killing you, which gets so fucking annoying after your 10th attempt, because you'll be hearing the same dialogue line over and over again. With all that being said, I honestly think this is about as good as a difficulty like this could be in a game that isn't designed around having a challenging experience. If this is your first playthrough of Ghost of Tsushima, I do not recommend playing on this difficulty. Play on either normal or hard first, and if you want to do a second playthrough and want to master the combat, then lethal mode is definitely worth it. There's no question that the last 10 years we've seen the birth of the Ubisoft-style open world, and then its eventual rise into popularity, taking over almost every open world game for the last 5 years or so now. Ubisoft has turned basically all of their franchises into map marker-style open world games, a style that focuses on a large world with a lot of little activities like finding collectibles, clearing out enemy fortresses, climbing towers to reveal the map, hunting, crafting, and so on. You've seen the likes of The Witcher 3 and Spider-Man follow suit, all of which have their own slightly different take on the open world, but ultimately feel very samey. Now, here comes Ghost of Tsushima with its Ubisoft-style open world, and it hit with a resounding yes. A lot of people loved what Sucker Punch did here, and so do I. This is a remarkable open world, not only in visuals, but also in its content. Much of the fat that you would find in other open world games just isn't here. The world isn't daunting in size, it's not cluttered in map markers, and the whole game only takes about 30 hours to complete, or closer to 50 hours if you want to 100% everything it has to offer. All the open world objectives here are fun, quick, and offer an instant reward to players or show some clear progression. You'll find hot springs which look great and increase your maximum health. You'll create haiku, which is utterly gorgeous in both visuals and audio, and will also give you new headbands. Foxes will lead you to shrines, unlocking new charm slots, and the Golden Birds of Tsushima will lead you to all the different types of points of interest around the map. There are 3 different types of enemy fortresses: farms, basic camps, and the biggest, guarded fortresses, but they are never overabundant. And the best thing about all of this is it's never mandatory. You don't have to do any of this stuff in order to progress the story. There's no level gating or requirements in order to move forward with the game. While I personally do quite enjoy ticking off map markers, I'm glad I wasn't forced to do it in either playthrough, although on lethal difficulty, you are rewarded far more for exploring the open world. Another thing that I loved about exploring is the sense of player power progression. Ghost of Tsushima has light RPG elements. You'll find sets of armor, and you have very few weapons. The katana you start with the game with is the same weapon you'll finish with. You only get 2 different types of bows, and there's only a handful of different armor sets. But each individual part can be upgraded in a clear and obvious way. Upgrade your sword to increase its damage. Upgrade your dagger to make stealth kills quicker and quieter. Upgrading your bows increases damage, range, draw time, and so on. If you want to take less damage, there's an armor you can upgrade that will do exactly that. If you want to be stealthier, well then upgrade your ghost armor. The reason I favour this system over a proper looter is because each individual upgrade feels so much more useful rather than the same looking item giving you 5% more defense rating or 3 more attack damage. To get back to exploration for a moment, I want to continue talking about the beautiful presentation here. Ghost of Tsushima's art design is definitely the most standout aspect of the game. In particular, the use of colour here is mesmerising. The Golden Temple feels alive with its yellow leaves falling from above, or the blood-soaked trees you'll ride under, or the fields of white flowers across Tsushima. The use of colour is just perfect across all of the landscapes. Even the warm glow of the sunset is stunning. Honestly, such a small number of games even come close to the visual design on display here. What further elevates these visuals is the sound design. I think this is the best sounding game since Breath of the Wild, simply because I have not had this much fun exploring an open world or been this relaxed running around grassy fields since Breath of the Wild. It's so easy to kick back and ride around doing haiku, listening to the chirping birds overhead, cutting bamboo, and going to the hot springs. There's moments here that feel like a dream state level of relaxation. Music is also a massive part in all of this. Music sounds like classic Japanese samurai music, something that you would find in a Kurosawa film for example. Speaking of Kurosawa, there's an awesome visual setting here which makes everything black and white, adds film scratches and extra film grain, and tunes the audio to sound really tinny like an old Kurosawa film. This is a fun way to play, and I appreciate it, but I cannot recommend playing like this on your first playthrough because you do not want to miss out on these gorgeous visuals. I love the gesture of this visual mode, but it's not worth the trade-off. To close out this review, it's time to talk about the more negative aspects of Ghost of Tsushima. First off is the dull mission design. I think this will be the easiest way to explain why the missions here are boring. 90% of what you'll be doing in the side missions and main missions is: first, you'll go somewhere to talk to someone, and then you'll travel somewhere else to talk to another person or investigate something on the ground, and then travel somewhere else to fight someone. There are also a lot of trailing missions here, and a lot of stealth missions. Unfortunately, that's the majority of the quests. The other 10% are the really good story missions, or the mythic tales. What made the bad missions so much more aggravating for me on my second playthrough is that you can't skip the cutscenes in this game. There is no option for you to skip anything unless you're on New Game Plus. So if you're silly like me and don't have your original save files anymore, you're screwed. Seriously though, why is this still a thing in 2021? This is almost as bad as the instant fail stealth missions. And this really turned me off of doing any of the more generic side missions and kept me bored for a lot of the mythic tales and main missions. Although some of these quests are good, I didn't want to rewatch all of the same boring cutscenes. I replayed this to experience the harder combat and explore Tsushima again. So anytime I was watching one of the tiresome exchanges between basic NPC and Jin, I was back on my phone. This isn't to say every mission is bad. There are some really good cutscenes and missions in the main campaign, but taking part in much of the side content will bring the pace to a screeching halt. I suppose this is the best time to talk about the characters and story. Ghost of Tsushima is set in 13th century Japan on the island of Tsushima. You play as Jin Sakai, a samurai who is the head of Clan Sakai and nephew to Lord Shimura. During the opening mission, all the samurai are slaughtered by the invading Mongols. Lord Shimura has been taken captive, and Jin Sakai has been left for dead on the beach. Yuna, a thief, finds Jin and nurses him back to health while also teaching him how to be the ghost. Jin is now tasked with trying to save Tsushima and his uncle. You are now set free into the open world and go have fun. Oh, but first, look at our opening sequence. Honestly, this opening sequence is a masterclass for intros. It's so fucking incredible. It perfectly articulates the style of the game and looks so good. And that quality continues through the beginning of the story. It's fun and exciting like any good beginning to an adventure. You're quickly being introduced to all the characters, you go into new locations and the themes of the stories are starting to surface. And then eventually something starts to feel off. The characters and dialogue begin to feel really flat and kinda lifeless. The story here is interesting and I like where it goes and how it's told, but the characters are really forgettable. Jin was a really big missed opportunity. This character needed to be great. While he didn't need to rival Kratos or Geralt, he did need to have some sort of personality. I just think he doesn't emote enough. He's very stoic, which causes this disconnect. This is further enhanced by everyone being so flat in their delivery of the lines here. It's not entirely the actor's fault, because the writing here just isn't that interesting. It's missing an X factor, something that is unique in its own right, something that would have made this stand out among other games. While the story and characters here aren't terrible, they're not great either. Everything is just riding that line of average with a few standout moments from time to time. The story is fine for your first time through, but do not replay this game for it because you'll be extremely let down and bored. Except for that ending though, it's very great. If you choose the quote-unquote bad ending, you'll be very happy. The other ending, however, is kind of forgettable. Ghost of Tsushima is a fantastic start to what will inevitably be a franchise. While it has a ton of flaws, it also gets the most important things correct that a game needs for it to be fun. Gameplay is tight and has a lot of variety with all the different ways to approach combat. Something I didn't talk about was the enemy variety, but it's very good. There are a lot of different types of enemies and enemy subclasses. It's something I always really appreciate because it keeps gameplay fresh and engaging. Visuals and sound design are top tier and help to make everything feel so much more relaxing than it should be. While Ghost of Tsushima is a game that will feel very familiar, it's that good kind of familiar. Something that is just very comforting to play. Yeah, its story isn't great, but it's good enough for the first playthrough, and that's all that really matters. Of course I wish the story was incredible, but Sucker Punch is one of the smaller AAA studios, and I think they use their limited resources in the correct places. If you have played Ghost of Tsushima, I'd love to hear what you thought about it, and if you haven't, definitely go play it, because you will not be disappointed.